there's an acronym, LODI, the Law of Diminishing Intent. And what the law of diminishing intent says is that the longer we delay doing something, the less likely it is that we'll do it. According to John Maxwell, who popularized the law of diminishing intent, if we don't make some move towards doing something within 48 hours, we're very unlikely to do it at all. All right, folks, Todd here, and I'm here with our rockstar director of customer success, Leyah Valgardson. Leyah, how are you this morning?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
Excellent. So we're going to be talking about a thing that robs more people of money, happiness, accomplishment, causes more stress than I think most people realize. And it's actually a much bigger issue. And I would say it's robbed a lot of entrepreneurs of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's probably robbed me of hundreds of thousands of dollars, I would say, as well as other things that are even more valuable than money. So the topic we're going to be talking about is procrastination. We're going to go through this test and you'll find out what type of procrastinator are you. It turns out there are 6 procrastinators, according to psychologists. We'll open up the door and turn on the light and look at some hidden truths about procrastination, as well as the hidden dangers. There are some things you really need to be aware of if you're like, yeah, I'm a procrastinator, but it's not really that bad. I get stuff done. There are some hidden dangers of procrastination, and then we'll give you some strategies that psychologists have come up with for whatever type of procrastinator you happen to be. So right now you might be thinking, you know what, this sounds great, but maybe I should do this later. If so, resist the urge to procrastinate. So, all right, Leyah, you ready to jump into this and talk about procrastination, or should we do this another time? What do you think?
I was kind of thinking we should put this off for another week or two. Is that okay?
Irony. All right, so let's talk about the 6 types of procrastinators. So listen carefully, for those of you listening to this, listen carefully and see which type you are. You might be more than one type. And then Leyah and I are going to talk a little bit about what type of procrastinator we are. So psychologists have identified 6 types of procrastinators. The first 3 types avoid doing a task or a behavior they know they should be doing because of anxiety in some form. So number 1, procrastinator type number 1 is the worrier. The worrier, this is the definition. The worrier doesn't start that important or difficult task because they don't believe they'll be able to do it. They fear they won't succeed. They feel anxiety at the thought of failure. Thus, it is better to not start the task, as you can't feel the negative emotions associated with failure if you don't make an attempt in the first place. The issue with this logic is that you're guaranteed to fail if you don't start. The typical procrastinating belief associated with the worrier is, quote, I won't be able to because fill in the blank. So it's all about fear, all about worrying that they won't succeed. So I'm curious, Leyah, what does this look like in the wild, out in the business world? Maybe you've seen it in your career, maybe you've seen it with some of our clients, but what does that look like in the real world?
Oh my gosh, I think we see this show up all the time, and especially with entrepreneurs. I think more so than anyone else. I know when I took the leap from corporate to being an entrepreneur myself, I wanted to be an entrepreneur for years. It took me years to take that leap because of this. You know, these false beliefs about it's more stable if I have this other job. And I don't know if I'm going to be set to do that, or if I'm ready, or I'll probably fail. And even after going down that road, this definitely plagues me a lot from taking on new tasks, so I know I've seen this for sure in my life. And I think many people see this. It's what keeps us from going after the things we really want to do and the type of person we really want to be, because we're worried about failure. We're worried maybe even not our own failure, but what other people will think if we try to do something and maybe we fail. So it definitely is driven by anxiety and fear, but I think it shows up quite often in many of us.
Yeah. I did some research on what psychologists call the inner critic a couple of years ago, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. We have this voice in our head. It's trying to keep us from the shame of failure. So there's this thing that lives in our amygdala, which we're going to talk about, this reptilian part of our brain that's trying to protect us from the shame of failure. And so what it does is it says, hey, this thing you're thinking about, there's a risk of failure. There's a risk of looking stupid. There's a risk of being rejected by clients, by friends, this fear of loss. So this part of the brain says, hey, that looks kind of scary. So we're going to throw up all sorts of smoke screens and flares and distractions to keep us from doing that, because what if it doesn't work? So it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. Like it said, the issue with this logic is that you're guaranteed to fail. This is what doesn't make sense. There's a fear of failure. This fear of failure guarantees failure, right? Which is completely illogical if you think about it. But the part of the brain where that inner critic lives, it's not logical at all. All it wants to do is protect you from the shame of failure, which I call my inner critic Steve. I named it. Like, that sounds like Steve talking to me. No offense to people named Steve. But, all right. So procrastinator type number 2. This one might hit close to home with you, Leyah. We'll talk about that. Is the perfectionist. The perfectionist. So here's the definition. In a similar vein to the worrier, the perfectionist doesn't start the task because of a fear of failure again. However, for the perfectionist, failure equates to not doing the task perfectly. The typical perfectionist belief might sound something like, quote, if I don't do the task extremely well, then I am a failure. A good example of this are people who are waiting to start their business until everything is perfect and organized. They're getting ready, constantly getting ready to get ready. And as the world is often messy and chaotic, these perfect conditions rarely exist. So I feel like you can speak to this one a little bit, right? So
I definitely can.
What does this perfectionism look like out in the wild?
Oh, goodness. I think, it's an interesting thing that it mentioned getting started. I think with some perfectionists, this is probably me. I don't have a problem necessarily getting started. It's the finishing. So it can be tackled from any angle, really. But at the end of the day, nothing is ever complete. Nothing is ever done. So there's always this level of procrastination that happens because it's never perfect. And in some ways, that's a protection. Some ways that's a safety. For me, personally, I'll speak to me, that makes it easier for me not to ever get to the finish line because it's never done. And I'm not a failure necessarily because I'm working on it. I'm always working on it. So you can see how that's really, quite frankly, it's a lie. It's a lie to myself of I'm not really doing anything. That is a pure form of procrastination and just not getting things done while I'm just kind of muddling around in something because I'm always tweaking it or looking at here or that needs to change here. But one thing that I know you've definitely cautioned me on this and guided me on this, but also a really good mentor of mine would often say, done is better than perfect. And that was not an easy thing for me to hear, but it is true. Done is better than perfect, because otherwise I will always be stuck in that cycle of it just needs a little more tweaking. Something else needs to change and nothing ever happens.
Yeah. And it sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? It's like, well, maybe if we just, we could make it better, right? So maybe let's say you're in sales, right? Which brings up all sorts of fear of failure. If you're in sales, then the thing that's going to make you sales is getting in front of potential customers and making offers, right? However, a lot of salespeople will spend all sorts of time shuffling through leads, organizing emails, all of which sounds justified. Like, yeah, well, if I just get my inbox to 0, if I spend 4 hours getting to inbox 0 a day, then that feels really good. And deep down, it's going to keep me from being on the phone, but it's going to make me feel busy. And I'm going to say, look, the day's gone. Or if there's, say, you need to get an estimate out the door, let's be honest, sending a proposal out to a potential client represents a risk of failure. So maybe you do all sorts of other busyness to protect yourself from failure. Or here's a big one, conflict, right? Conflict. If you have to have a tough conversation with an employee or trade partner or somebody like that, then this flares up like, well, maybe you need to think about it one more day. Or what if it doesn't go well? And you end up with busyness. Busyness is a really sneaky form of procrastination. You're just staying busy doing stuff that's not going to move the needle for you. And all the while thinking, well, we're making it better. We're making it better. But then nothing ever happens. That's the reality.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
I think
number
it's
3.
a sneaky and dangerous one. Sorry to interrupt you, Todd. That staying busy.
Yeah.
Not only sneaky, but really dangerous.
Yeah. So how so? How do you see that as dangerous?
I think it's dangerous because, as you mentioned, you're every day, every week, you're staying busy. You're doing things all day long. But as you also said, the needle is never moving. But at the end of the week, you can look back and say, well, but I worked 10 hours every single day. I checked that off. I was busy. I did something. But what you were doing isn't actually moving anything. It's not getting you anywhere. So really it's that, perpetual spinning of the hamster wheel, or staying on the hamster wheel, if you will.
Yeah, and what that looks like for a lot of construction business owners would be running around, busy, driving to job sites, picking up materials, wasting their time on things that aren't moving the needle. And they feel good. Maybe they're checking things off, but they're just not getting anywhere. Yeah. And you can spend a lot of time, feel really busy, and not do anything. And actually, if you're doing stuff that somebody else should be doing, you're actually making things worse. It's actually negative. Okay. Number 3, the third type of procrastinator is the overdoer. The overdoer. I thought this one was kind of interesting. This procrastinator, the overdoer, is motivated by anxiety. So the overdoer commits to doing too many tasks, then they fail to prioritize the important tasks and thereby fail to get any of them done on time. The classic overdoer belief around procrastination is, quote, if I don't accomplish all of this, then I'm not good enough. Let me say that again for the people in the back. The classic overdoer belief is, if I don't accomplish all of this, if I don't get everything done, then I'm not good enough. The fear of not living up to their own impossible standards or the imagined impossible standards of others causes them to take on too much and not get the critical tasks done. So let's talk about this one for a little bit. Taking on too many tasks, agreeing to do everything, thinking they have to accomplish all of that. What does that look like out in the real world, Leyah? Have you seen this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see it often with our clients too, especially when they first come to us. This is a classic business owner who has so much on their plate. They're just in chaos and complete stress and have, excuse me, really no direction or hope because they're just so cluttered and muddled down with things. And the reality is they're taking on way more than they need to be taking on. And you can see this across all different jobs within a business, right? But oftentimes it does land on the business owner where they are taking on everything and not being willing to distribute that responsibility out to their team. And I think some of that is, there's a lot there, again, fear. They're holding on to things because it is their business and their baby, and they maybe don't trust others around them to do it. And there's also probably a bit of a sense of that, well, I have to do all these things because that's my value. That's what makes me good enough, is if I do all of these things. And so you can see this again at every level, but we often can see this when we have some of our clients coming in and they're just so overwhelmed. And a lot of it really lines up with this, is finding the way to organize that and to distribute that out to where they're finding value in the really important tasks and not just adding more things onto the plate.
Yeah, this phrase that the fear of not living up to the imagined impossible standards of others causes them to take on too much. So I feel like what this looks like is, I've heard from some construction business owners that, well, I need to be willing to do everything that everybody else is willing to do, right? So nothing is beneath me. I need to be willing to throw on the tool belt at a moment's notice. I need to be able to be a firefighter and go help my people. I need to do all of this stuff. So there are these imagined impossible standards. And I think one of those imagined standards is just busyness. Mm-hmm. If I run into, I can tell if somebody's in the construction industry. If I run into them, they'll typically ask me the same question. If I haven't seen them in a while, they'll say, "You staying busy? You guys busy?" Like, busy is good. And no, I'm as busy as I want to be, but there's this, maybe part of this is there's this expectation. Well, I'm the entrepreneur. I'm the owner. I have to work 60, 70 hours a week. I have to wear all the hats. It has to be an absolute grind, which that may fall under the category of this impossible standard, or maybe an imagined impossible standard, that you have to do it all. And I could tell you, if you believe you have to do it all, then you are holding your organization back. You're the lid on your organization, and it will never grow beyond that point until you get over that belief that you have to do it all, or you have to work crazy hours. I worked with a guy who had worked for a man who had lots of imagined ridiculous beliefs, and he believed busyness was the most important thing. And he would say things like, "Damn, that guy's not even sweating. He must not be working hard." And like, okay, you just want somebody to work up a sweat whenever you're around, and that's what productivity looks like. So these beliefs can really hold you back as an entrepreneur, and hold back your team and your company and everybody involved. Mm-hmm. So, okay, let's talk about the second category of procrastination. And the next three types of procrastinators are motivated by what is called low frustration tolerance. Low frustration tolerance is a belief that we won't be able to cope or put up with the frustration of the mundane, the repetitive, or the boring aspects of a task or a situation. So this leads to two emotions: boredom and frustration or anger. So the first three were about fear and anxiety. The next three are about frustration and boredom. So procrastinator type number 4 is the crisis maker. This is an interesting one. This is an interesting character right here. The crisis maker believes that in order to, and I'll say this, a lot of construction business owners fall squarely in this category. I've seen it. So the crisis maker believes that in order to be motivated to do a task, they need the stress or the pressure that is inherent in last-minute action. They need a deadline. They need urgency. Without this, they believe, they won't perform at their best. They need pressure to alleviate the boredom. There's an issue with this. If you compare the quality of work when started at the last minute and when started within a reasonable time frame, which do you think will give better results? So this is I call this what did I call this? Firefighter philia. They love being the firefighter. And it's like it's sort of like a firefighter who's also an arsonist, right?
That's a good way to put it.
Love putting out fires. And if there are no fires, then they're going to go create some fires or they'll allow things to turn into fires because they need that kind of pressure to get anything done. They need a crisis. Mm-hmm. So what have you seen out of this type of procrastinator? Have you seen this type out in the real world?
Oh, I think all the time. These are the folks that say I work better under pressure. They're constantly waiting to the last minute because then it's the pressure. It's that heightened I don't even know what it might be. Maybe a bit of adrenaline rush of getting everything done at the last minute. And to your point, not only the firefighter, but the arsonist. So finding opportunities to create some of that drama or some of that adrenaline that's going to keep moving forward. And I think really that's it's driven by someone who isn't really clear on how to organize things and how to function in a more peaceful way, or in a more peaceful is maybe not quite the right word, especially in a business sense, but something that's just flowing easy. That's so foreign to these folks because they've always operated from this standpoint. So to your point, I think they create a lot of their own problems because they don't know how to perform in any other way. But can you imagine the level of stress that is for you constantly to be under, physically, mentally, emotionally, all of it, and what that does to your team?
Yeah. So a lot of entrepreneurs would say, I can handle the stress. But that brings up a good point. Your team probably does not consist of a lot of entrepreneurs. Maybe you can handle that stress. Maybe you work best in that scenario, but there's a pretty good chance they don't. And your inability to get stuff done without some sort of deadline is causing a lot of stress and strain for the team. The way I've seen this show up is what it sounds like is I do my best work when my back's against the wall. I can work my way out of any situation. Angry customer, I'll sort it out. Need to make payroll, cash flow crisis, I'll go get some checks. Running out of work, we'll go find something to keep the guys busy. And this is how we end up in this roller coaster effect. I hear from a lot of people who say things like, well, we're in this constantly in this roller coaster. We go sell a bunch of work, and then we get really busy executing that work, and we're not out selling. Then we run out of work, so then we all jump in to sell work, and the cycle starts all over. So I think this if you find yourself in this cycle or roller coaster, it's probably because of this crisis maker issue. And the real problem is, if you're truly a crisis maker, then you won't get stuff done unless it's urgent. And you'll always be doing just enough to get by. This is what, if you find yourself doing just enough to get by, we're always have just enough work. We always have just enough people. We always have just enough money in the bank. We're just getting by. Then it's probably because you're a crisis maker. And that's what it takes for you to make action or to take action and get stuff done. And until you change that, you're probably going to be stuck in that cycle. Yeah.
One thing as we're going through these, Todd, that I find interesting, I've done a little bit of study on the Strengths Finder. I don't know if you're familiar with that test, but in that, it helps us to identify what our top strengths are. And as we're going through each of these, I can see how all of these are really strengths. But with every strength, there is a light side of it and a shadow side of it. And when we're sinking into the shadow side of each of these things, that's where the procrastination comes in. I'm thinking of the crisis maker as an achiever. They're people who get stuff done, and that's awesome. I'm thinking of the perfectionist as someone who makes things better all the time. These are all strengths. These are good things. But it's when we are leaning into them in the shadow side of it that it turns into something negative. And it creates a problem, not only for us, but for others. And so I don't think that these are necessarily bad qualities. It's just we got to take these and harness them and reframe them to be a positive. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that just occurred to me as we were going through these, how each of these really are a positive thing if we can utilize them that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. It is the other side of a double-edged sword. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's talk about the next one. Number 5 is the dreamer. The dreamer doesn't think they should have to work hard to get what they want. They think it should all just fall in their lap. This is what I call the field of dreams approach. Build it, and they will come. Well, there's James Earl. There's this voice, James Earl Jones, or whoever's saying it. Build it, and they will come. Actually, James Earl Jones was his friendly compadre there in that movie, but they think it should just be easy. Stuff should just fall in my lap. And we've all met or even been the dreamer. Grand ideas, does very little about them. The thought of actually having to do some work either bores them or frustrates them. So they just think, I shouldn't have to work hard to fulfill my dreams. That's the dreamer. I'm curious, have you seen this out in your experience?
Yes. I think sometimes this can also be called a visionary, but again, we're talking about maybe the shadow side of it. And these folks are really, really great at having that high level view of what is possible and these really big ideas of what can work and what should be. But I think the shadow side of this is just expecting it all to fall in their lap without the work and without the effort and without the consistency of moving things forward. And so you can see this across all types of people, right? I think all of us have maybe a small element of this. But yeah, I think there's definitely a part where the actual action never happens because the ideas are so grand and so big, and maybe there's a bit of ego involved in this as well, where it's just expected that something should happen without the effort.
And I think another way that shows up is the visionary entrepreneur has this idea in their head and it's really clear to them, and either they don't articulate that at all with anyone, or maybe they talk about it once and they just think, all right, I just I just completely monologued to my team about this grand vision I have during our Monday meeting. And that was 3 months ago. Why hasn't it happened yet? I told them about it. Now, the week before that, I told them about another grand vision. And then I guess the week before that, I unveiled another grand vision. And I guess I've been unveiling these grand visions pretty much on a weekly basis, but none of them have come true. What's the problem? And they get frustrated because they spoke it into existence. Maybe they wrote it in their unicorn journal and it hasn't come to pass. And they just get frustrated. And talk about frustrating your team. That is a good way to frustrate your team. If you're constantly dreaming out loud, and this is something visionaries really have to be careful about, is constantly bombarding your team with these big visions and then not giving them the space or the direction to actually execute on those things. Mm-hmm. So this is a sneaky form of procrastination, because if you spend all your time dreaming about stuff, visualizing it, if you don't actually put any work into place, it's probably not going to happen. But it feels good, right? It feels good to dream. That feels a lot better than actually rolling up your sleeves and putting together an implementation plan and a schedule and the details. Typically what happens is like, that's frustrating. Either I shouldn't have to do that, or I hate this shit, or I don't want to do it, so I'm going to go back to dreaming and go back to my vision board. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think, too, a problem with that is, to your point, every week there's a new vision. Every week there's something new and exciting. But especially if you're guiding and leading a team and you're coming with that every week, no one really knows what's a priority. No one really knows, well, what are we doing? What is the actual goal? And I think, to your point, that can often get overlooked or just ignored after time because no one really knows what to do, or they may even start charging down a direction with something and then you're coming back with something new the very next week. And I think how this shows up for people personally is the same thing. Just always chasing after the shiny object. So this week it sounds really great to do this thing. And next week it sounds really great to do that thing, but there's no real effort happening. There's nothing really going with that. And again, a positive of it is visionaries are what create what we have. We would not be where we are today with technology and with the things that we have in our world without great visionaries. But what they've done is they've partnered with people who are really good at executing, or they're also really great at figuring out a plan and an implementation to put things into action and to make that happen. So all really good things. It just can definitely keep us stuck in that procrastination cycle as well.
Yep. It's a strength that has to be managed properly. All right. The last one. This one surprised me. This sixth type of procrastinator surprised me, probably for two reasons, which I'll talk about in a minute. But here it is. Imagine the situation. Your boss has given you a boring, mundane, or just downright stupid task to do. You think it's not worthwhile. You're angry, maybe resentful. So you delay. You put off doing it to do other tasks you think are more important. However, what you're forgetting is that you'll have to do that task eventually, as the person who gave it to you is your boss, or maybe your customer. The typical belief underlying the Defier's feelings of frustration and rebellious behavior is anger. And underlying this anger is the belief, quote, I shouldn't have to do it, end quote. The issue is, in life, you probably do have to do it. So for entrepreneurs, maybe you don't have a boss, but actually you do have a boss. You have customers. And the customer may ask for something, they may have a question. Here's how this shows up a lot, okay? A customer asks a question about something. Hey, I noticed this, what's going on? And the Defier's response will be, why are they asking me? I'm the builder. I'm the contractor. I know what I'm doing. They're questioning me. I shouldn't have to answer any questions. Who the hell are they to ask me questions? I shouldn't have to answer questions. I shouldn't have to deal with customers. All I want to do is build, right? Another way this shows up is when somebody on the team asks a question, something they're not clear about, like, hey, what are we doing here? I'm not clear on this. And again, they think, I shouldn't have to answer this stuff. I shouldn't have to deal with these mundane details. I'm a peacock, I got to fly. I'm a free-range pony. I need to move and shake. I shouldn't be having to deal with this stuff. So they get angry because they think, I shouldn't have to do this. I remember talking with a guy who was an entrepreneur, and all he wanted to do was his work. He just wanted to go work in his shop and work on stuff, and he was a classic, I shouldn't have to do it when it came to anything related to selling, accounting, systems, delegation. He just wanted to do his work and believed that he shouldn't have to do anything else. And not surprisingly, he is no longer in that business. What about you? Have you seen this Defier out in the wild?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably a little bit of a Defier in all of us. Every one of us has something that we have to do in life, whether that is our professional life, personal life, whatever it may be, that we don't love to do. And we definitely have that belief of, I shouldn't have to do this. I don't want to do this. And we get really obstinate and stubborn about those things. And so we just put it off. I think this is pretty typical for every person, if we're being honest. This shows up for every one of us at some point. And of course, there are so many ways that we can overcome this and many ways that we can just tackle this and get things done, even when they're things we don't enjoy. We'll talk about that in a moment. I just had a thought, though, as we were going through this, as it related to the one right before. The dreamer. Can you imagine the dreamer and the Defier together? Where the dreamer's coming up with these things and tasking him with the Defier, and the Defier's like, I don't want to do this. It's going to be something new again next week. So you can imagine how that would just be some crazy form of chaos right there. So I think it's also important that we understand how others in our world relate to these different ways of procrastination.
And that's a great point. We're talking about like looking in the mirror and asking yourself, what kind of procrastinator are you? But you also have to realize that, well, everyone around you is one of these types of procrastinators, or more than one of these types. So you bring up a great point. If you have the dreamer, visionary, at the head of the company, and you have some Defiers on the team, maybe some perfectionists on the team, it can be a mess. It's no wonder nothing gets done. So I think it's really important to recognize how procrastination shows up for you, but also recognize how it shows up for your people, because you need to communicate with them and delegate to them in a way and coach them in a way that helps them overcome their tendencies. So speaking of looking in the mirror, here's how procrastination shows up for me, probably in a few ways. I would say, I mentioned I was surprised about the Defier. And one thing that surprised me about that is that I am one. This shows up for me, which quite frankly probably got me fired at least once, maybe twice. Yeah, definitely once, and maybe twice, and didn't make me a great employee at times. So that shows up. Probably the other one is I'm definitely not a perfectionist. You could probably attest to that. And I would say probably the Worrier. The things that slow me down would be, it's probably not going to work, so why bother? And that becomes one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. So what about you? What are the ways that procrastination shows up for you?
Oh gosh, I think it's a pretty heavy balance between the perfectionist and the Worrier. Probably more so the perfectionist for me though. And going back to those strengths, that's one of my main strengths is that I take things and I make them better. But the challenge on that, which I've seen and you've experienced, is I will just keep tinkering at something over and over again and working at it until it's perfect, but perfect doesn't exist. And so that is something that I often have to really temper, and I really have to be okay with just done is better than perfect. And then I think the Worrier, there's always that, I think it's really innate in humans to believe something about us isn't good enough, and that doesn't feel good. It's that, like you were saying, that shame or that emotional drive of something that just doesn't feel good. So instead of even risking that, let's just stay away from it completely. I think that's happened a lot for me in life. It certainly, has been very present in many situations. And yet anytime I've really defied that and just dove headfirst into something, even if I failed, it was definitely better than having any regrets of something that I didn't do. And then definitely, I think the Defier, like we said, there's a little bit of that in every single one of us where, we're tasked with something, we have to do something. And again, it may not even be in our professional life, but we're like, I don't want to do that. I shouldn't have to. So we just get a little bit stubborn with that. Mine's a little bit more of a silent stubborn, but it plays out for me from time to time.
Yeah. It's that inner critic, which is, to me, the Worrier. The inner critic is so sneaky, and it wants to protect us from the shame of failure, so we end up not doing anything at all, which guarantees failure. Let's talk about failure, right? So personally, I believe failure is a myth. Failure is a myth in most cases, especially in business. If you look at the people who are very successful, they have experienced what some would call failure. Maybe they thought felt a lot like failure in the moment, but it turned into a stepping stone to their success. And maybe they wouldn't even be that successful, or they wouldn't be as successful as they are today if that thing that felt like failure in the moment had not happened. I can look back in my career, in my life, at several things that sure felt like failure, and I called a failure, that set me up for later success. So I think this, like if you put it together, the inner critic is trying to protect us from the shame of failure, but failure doesn't exist. So it's trying to protect us from this myth that doesn't exist, and it can be very dangerous, which we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So let's talk about some cold, hard truths about procrastination. Some of these came from a book called I think it's The Erroneous Zones by Wayne Dyer. One of the most practical books on psychology I've ever read. Love it. Mm-hmm. And some of it came from some psychologists. So I'm just going to read through a couple of these cold, hard truths about procrastination that could rattle your cage a little bit. Then we'll talk about some of the hidden dangers of procrastination and what you can do, some strategies you can use to defeat procrastination. So these caused me to hug the porcupine of self-awareness when I read these. So here's a few. First one, resolving to do something in the future, which you could do now, is an acceptable substitute for doing it. it permits you to delude yourself that you are really not compromising yourself by not doing it. So we tell ourselves procrastination is basically accepting this belief that resolving to do something in the future is an acceptable substitute for doing it. And it's delusional. We are deluding ourselves, right? Speaking of that, procrastination is self-delusion. It enables you to delude yourself into believing you are something other than what you really are. Let me say that again. It enables you to delude yourself into believing you are something than what you really are. Like, I'm an action taker. I am an action-taking entrepreneur. I'm a problem solver. I face things head on. And then when you run into one of these situations, you worry, you get frustrated, you're a dreamer, you're a defier, you delude yourself by saying, yeah, I'm still an action taker, but I'm just not going to be an action taker right now. Yeah. This one hit hard. The chronic procrastinator would rather people think they lack effort than lack ability. The chronic procrastinator would rather people think they lack effort than lack ability. Because as long as they put it off, then people won't know if they can do it or not. So they would much rather people believe they lack effort than lack ability. And the last one is procrastinators focus on how to make themselves feel better at the expense of drawing insight from what made them feel bad. They comfort themselves in the present with the false belief that they'll be more emotionally equipped to handle a task in the future. Let me say that again. They comfort themselves, we all do this, we comfort ourselves right now with the false belief that we'll be more emotionally equipped to handle a task in the future. So the future self becomes the beast of burden for procrastination. They basically think, well, future Todd will be better able to handle the feelings of insecurity and frustration than today Todd. So we make our future self the beast of burden, and we comfort ourselves saying, you know what, now's not a good time. I'm not in the right place, yada, 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 yada. But the future me, future Todd, is going to be better equipped to handle a task. So what I hear a lot is, talk to a lot of people who say, yes, our business is chaotic. Yes, I'm working 70, 80 hours a week. Yes, I'm wearing all the hats. Yes, I'm exhausted. Yes, the stress is affecting me. Yes, it's costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year because of this chaos. But now it's just not a good time. What they're basically saying is, future me in 3 months or 6 months is probably going to be better equipped to handle this. So we're just going to kick that can down the road to future me and say that's his problem or that's her problem in the future. And it is, so the takeaway here is procrastination is self-delusion. So let's talk about the dangers, some of the hidden dangers of procrastination. It's not just, when we think about procrastination, sometimes we think, well, we waited until the night before to study for a test. But we still took the test, things still did okay. Or we waited until the last minute to get an estimate out or something like that. But we're talking about bigger, higher level procrastination. And so let's talk about this question. What happens if we continue to procrastinate? Well, the first thing we want to talk about is this. There's an acronym, LODI, the Law of Diminishing Intent. And what the law of diminishing intent says is that the longer we delay doing something, the less likely it is that we'll do it. According to John Maxwell, who popularized the law of diminishing intent, if we don't make some move towards doing something within 48 hours, we're very unlikely to do it at all. So what that looks like is you have some idea, some epiphany. I need to do this. We've got to make this happen. You start taking steps toward it, and then you procrastinate. Well, the time's not right. What if it doesn't work? I shouldn't have to do this, all of the 6 types of procrastination. And as days go on, your intent diminishes. And the likelihood of you taking action on that goes down. Same thing happens. This is what happens with customers. This is why there's an old saying that time kills deals, because of the law of diminishing intent. What do you think about that? Does that have you seen that in your career, Leyah?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is something we've all experienced, especially when maybe we learn something new, or we listen to a podcast, or we go to a conference or hear a webinar and something hits us and we're like, wow, that really is, it's driving home. It's something I think would be really helpful, and we get very excited about it. There's a lot of energy and a lot of positivity around that. But if we don't take that action, like you said, then a couple days down the road, you're like, maybe it just really wasn't that big of a deal. Maybe it's not going to help me. Maybe it's not really what I need right now, or down the road will be a better time. But to your point, that's exactly what happens, right? If we don't do something and take some action, as soon as we have that little ping that's like, this is important. You need to listen. You need to do something about it. If we don't do it, then it's easy to convince ourselves that it wasn't really that important anyways. The intent is gone. And that moment and in that same situation may show up again for you. I don't think we get a lot of those opportunities, though. I think it shows up and we get those little pings maybe once, maybe twice. But if we don't listen, then it just moves on, and then that opportunity is passed. And I really think that's a sad thing that happens to all of us. I know I've experienced that many times, where I hear something like I just mentioned, listening to a podcast, even maybe like this, where I'm like, wow, that is talking to me. That is my situation. That's exactly what I'm experiencing. I want to do something about this. And I can either jump on the website and sign up for something and move forward, or I don't. And then it passes me by. And here I find myself another year down the road and nothing has changed. So I think that's an opportunity that we need to pay attention to when those moments happen for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one reminds me of a situation that hits home with me back in early 2014. My grandfather was in the hospital, and the situation wasn't dire, but it was 2013, around Christmas. I went to see him in the hospital, and it was, I think, maybe Christmas Eve. And my grandmother had passed away 4 years before, so he was by himself. And I remember seeing him in the hospital, and again, Christmas Eve, and he said, "Are you going to come see me tomorrow?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll come see you tomorrow." And of course, the next day was Christmas with everything happening, and he lost consciousness, and I never got to see him after that, and never got to talk to him. And so now I have to deal with that regret. So when we procrastinate things, and I had the best of intentions when that happened, but I procrastinated, and this other thing, and what about this, and what will the kids think, and all this other stuff. And so what happens is when we procrastinate, one of the hidden problems, or one of the hidden dangers of procrastination, is you'll be stuck with regrets. And one of my favorite speakers, Jim Rohn, says, "We must all suffer from one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. The difference is discipline weighs ounces while regret weighs tons." And the reason regret weighs tons is because there's nothing you can do about it. You're just stuck with that regret. And a lot of regrets come from procrastination. If you're listening, you could probably think, there are opportunities I missed, things I procrastinated, like some of the things we hear are, I've just been working so much, and my kids are teenagers now, and I wasn't around when they were young, or they regret not taking care of their health. Now they're having health problems and they're just stuck. Or I've talked to people who are thinking about retirement, but they're stuck, and there's no way they're going to be able to retire. And they're stuck with this regret of, I should have been working on this 5, 10 years ago. And here I am. I'm stuck. Maybe they just have to shut things down. So you're going to deal with one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. And I can tell you personally that regret weighs tons. So let's talk about the next one, and I'll let you talk about this. How does quality of life suffer due to procrastination?
Oh, goodness. So many ways. I think often I think what is the smoke and mirrors behind this is we just get stuck in the day to day. We get stuck in a routine. We're doing the same thing every single day. I don't have time for it right now. We get comfortable, even if that comfort isn't what we really want. So it's kind of just the quality of life that we have these dreams and these visions of all the things that we really want. And there's this belief of, I'll put it off until tomorrow. And I think it's really important that you brought up that pain of regret, right? And the difference between discipline and regret. And both of them are going to be a pain. There's going to be some type of challenge related to one of those. But which one do we choose? One is very proactive. One just happens to us. And one we get to control a little bit more. We have more of our hand in what that is and how we approach it versus the other one just happening. I think, an easy one is we either choose to work out and have the pain of working out now and having a healthy body, or we choose that later on down the road, we may not have a healthy body at all, and we're choosing that pain. So this happens all the time. And, it's really difficult. And I think every single one of us has experienced some form of regret, like what you've shared, Todd, and that is really painful. And so even remembering those moments of regret to help move us forward in every aspect is helpful. But as it goes to the quality of life, we get stuck in that day-to-day grind, and it just is what it is. We're kind of on autopilot and nothing is really changing. But what happens is, this mundane turns into days and then weeks and then months, and then a year down the road, we're looking back and going, nothing changed. I'm still in the same spot with all of these dreams and these goals and these visions of what I want my life to be, or maybe even multiple years. We wake up 10 years later and nothing has changed. Personally, that's not a life I want to live. And so fighting against this regret, I think, is a day-to-day thing. It's something that we have to, even moment by moment, in the choices we make. Also talking a little bit about depression and anxiety. So when we have depression, it's typically because we're living in the past. It is that regret. It's the depression from something that could have been different. And then there's that anxiety and fear, which is related to the future. However, if we can mitigate all of that, it's living in the present. And again, it's making choices in the present moment to do something different and to move things forward. So that changes our quality of life. But when we don't, we're stuck in that depression and regret, or that anxiety and fear. And then, just a few other, go ahead.
No, well, what I was going to say is we keep talking about delusion. And I think one of the ways we delude ourselves is to believe there's not a cost if we procrastinate. It's not going to cost us anything to procrastinate. And that's what that part of the brain tells us is just put it off. It's not going to cost you anything. But there is a huge cost of inaction for many things. And in some cases, the cost of inaction, of no decision, is far worse than the cost of a wrong decision. But that's not what your procrastinating part of the brain is going to tell you. It's always going to tell you, just put it off. You shouldn't have to do it. You're not going to do it. Yeah, you'll do it sometime, and it's not going to hurt anything to wait. But what we're saying is there's a huge cost, a huge hidden cost of procrastination.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's this belief that there's always tomorrow. But the reality is there's only today. And, you shared a very painful experience where you didn't have tomorrow. And I have a similar one with losing my brother to cancer, in a moment where I had an opportunity to spend some one-on-one time with him, and I chose not to because I had other things that were distracting me that were more important. And right after that, he went into the hospital, and similar to your grandpa, he was no longer conscious, and I lost that moment of some one-on-one time with him. And to this day, that pains me, so Excuse me. But yeah, we don't always have tomorrow. And hopefully it's not about losing people that we love. It's also these moments of looking back and saying, gosh, I had tomorrow, but I lost tomorrow because I didn't make sense of it today. And we certainly don't want to do that. None of us want to do that. And I know we've all heard these stories of people in their late 90s or early hundreds or even on their deathbeds, and people ask them, what would you have done differently? Or what regrets do you have? And they're all the things that we know. It's not taking the chances. It's not spending time with the people that we love. It's not just diving right into our fears and facing them, And so I think it's so important that we take a moment to step back and get out of this day-to-day mundane, like rat race, if you will, because that's, I think, how we get stuck so quickly and easily in this procrastination too, is there's always tomorrow. I have too much going on. There's tomorrow. I'll do it later. But it doesn't serve us. It only hurts us. And so to move on with that as to how that hurts us, it's these limiting beliefs. We sabotage goals. Our self-esteem is compromised. I think this is an important one. It damages our reputation. People start to wonder if they can trust us if we say we're going to do something, or even if we don't say it, but it's expected. And then, of course, losing that precious time. And then there is also this mental and our mental and physical health. It will suffer when we're procrastinators. So as far as the mental health goes, it has been linked to having high levels of depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and ADHD, as well as poor impulse control, which I'm sure you can imagine. And then it's even linked to physical illness. So this plays out in a few different ways, but typically if you are procrastinating something, especially as it comes to your health, that means you're not going to get the health checkups that you need to. You're not going to work out like you need to. You're not getting the fresh air that you need to. You're not being mindful of your health. You're just delaying things. And typically, procrastinators in general, whether or not that's directly related to taking care of your health, they suffer from insomnia. They have more headaches and cardiovascular disease just because they have that higher level of stress. So there's a lot of things that play into procrastination and the dangers of procrastination. And I think it's a pretty heavy case. We probably didn't need to convince people too much. I think everyone knows why we shouldn't be procrastinating. And it's now, okay, well, how can I not be a procrastinator? I do think it's interesting, though. I read an article, and I'll just share this briefly, that those who procrastinate a lot, and I think all of us probably can say that we've struggled with this, they typically have a larger amygdala, which is the fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain. And so what that means is, and I'll read this is from Fast Company. Procrastinators are reacting emotionally, and the emotion-focused coping response is to escape. It's saying, I don't want to experience these negative emotions, all the things that we shared a little bit earlier. And I may experience them if I do this thing, so I'm just going to avoid it. And so how our brain perceives it is, let's push it off. Let's wait until tomorrow. Our future self can deal with that. And you had mentioned that. So one of the things that it says is we want to feel good now. Humans want to feel good now. And it is hedonistic over eudaimonic, I hope I said that right, which is the happiness we feel when we achieve meaningful goals. So even though that feels better to work towards something and to achieve it, our brain, especially in our amygdala, is meant to keep us safe and comfortable now. So it's going to put off that better feeling of tomorrow for the happiness that we feel now. And so, the amygdala is really running it. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some of these different strategies, but specifically to how our brain functions in all of this is being more present and mindful and then taking action. And I think just keep that in mind, that presence and that mindfulness, taking those deep breaths, which physiologically, when you take a deep breath, it forces your brain from the amygdala, your fight, flight, or freeze, to the prefrontal cortex. It's a physiological thing that our brain does. That's why we find ourselves in stressful situations going, do that. Take a few deep breaths, then take some action. That is one of the main things you can do to overcome this procrastination.
Okay, now we've beaten you up. You've stared at yourself in the mirror, realized what type of procrastinator you are, the the real hidden problems of that. Now let's talk about what can you do? What are some strategies you can use, some tools you can use to defeat procrastination? So Leyah, cover the first 3 types of procrastinators and what they can do.
Okay, let's dive right in. So for a worrier procrastinator, first of all, I think we need to recognize that no decision, that's a decision. So if we're saying no to something, we've already made that decision. And then it's a 2-step decision-making process. First, we need to commit ourselves to the goal. We had talked about that a little bit earlier, and then determine the steps to achieve that goal. So really it's, putting a flag in the ground, staking our claim, saying this is where I'm going to go. This is beginning with the end in the mind, right to left thinking, some of the things that you often talk about, Todd. And then from there, you're going to backtrack and say, what do I need to do right now to move that forward? And change your I don't know to one thing I do know is. This is a reframe. This is a shift in a belief. So right now, if you're saying, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to write a book. Maybe you don't. But what do you know? You can find out what you can do. One thing that I often will guide clients to do is I will say, I want you to take out a piece of paper and write down everything you can do right now, you alone, without any outside resources that can help move this forward. And go wild with it. You got to get really creative with this. You need to stay curious and be open to whatever flows. And then flip the page over. If you enlisted help from one other person, what could you do? And what you can do is you can kind of continue to expand that and go back and circle the ideas that are actually something that you can do. And that shifts it from I don't know to now I know. I have a handful of really great ideas and really great things that I can do to move things to move things forward. So it is shifting you into action by simply doing that. And I think really important is that mindset, especially for a worrier, someone who is driven by fear in this situation and that potential shame of failure is shifting that belief. Once again, what you said, Todd, there is really no failure. These are learning opportunities. We learn so much from this. And so changing your mindset to be able and willing to do something differently is really important. So that's for the first one. That's the worrier. Now, perfectionist. I need to take some notes here. Strive for good enough rather than perfection. That goes back to what I was saying earlier, that done is better than perfect. I think once again, this is a really important thing, not only to know what your destination is, but give yourself a deadline. That is really, really important. I know that's helped me quite a bit. Also having regular check-ins with people and accountability to help move things forward. That is key to keeping things on track and getting things done rather than perfect. Also recognizing what's realistic. What's realistic over ideal. In a perfect world doesn't exist. Okay. So we can't keep living in this dream of a perfect world in all of the ways that we approach this world, because it doesn't exist. So what's realistic? What can you realistically do? And then avoiding the all or nothing thinking. I think we see this happen a lot. So many of us set a lot of goals. I mean, here we are at the end of our first month in the year. How many of us still have those goals? How many of us are still running with those goals? So many of us suffer from this all or nothing. So we'll have a list of 25 goals and we're going to do all these things and we check off all this stuff every single day. It's not that realistic. We can't do all or nothing. So let's take it one step at a time. Ooh, I like this one. Once again, mindset, changing our have to want to. Or I even like to say, I get to. Mm-hmm. That even changes it to another level. I get to do this thing. And if we can, that relates to gratitude, which I know, Todd, you and I have talked a lot about. But if we get to, there it is. If we shift our belief and our mindset to saying, I get to do this thing, that's also pulling in a sense of gratitude for what you currently have and what you get in your life. So I like that one as well. And then I mentioned this earlier about having a time limit. Set a limit. Tell people what your goals are. Have someone help hold you accountable so that you are able to hit those thresholds. Even if it's not completely done to a perfection state, it's done. And that's a huge relief. And that moves things forward. Okay, the overdoer. This is one of the ways you can mitigate the procrastination for an overdoer is acknowledge the difference between priorities and demands. So if you recall, these are the folks that take on way too much. They have a massive to-do list. They're constantly saying yes to everyone, to every request. So this is where we really need to identify, is this a priority? Do I have to do this? This is where I think priorities come in line pretty strong. And we can do that in a lot of different ways. Prioritize A, B, and C. If it's not an A priority, it gets to fall to the wayside, at least for now. So those priorities are really important. Not demanding on others for approval. You need to find the approval within yourself. And I think that's part of what happens when we have that really long list of things and we're constantly saying yes, becoming a yes man or a yes woman. It's because we're seeking that approval. We don't need to seek that approval from outside sources. And our approval or our value is not dependent on what we do. And then this one can often be hard, especially for, especially for people pleasers and those who are maybe seeking a little bit of that outside, is learning to say no. And guess what? No is a complete sentence. There doesn't need to be any outside explanation or reasons or purpose, because if you do that, that just opens the door for someone to convince you to go back to that yes. So getting really comfortable with saying no when it's appropriate and leaving it that no, period. So those are some ways for those first three, those who are driven a little bit by fear in our procrastination.
Yeah, great stuff. A lot of people have a speech impediment. They can't say the word no. They're like, okay, I'll do it. And they overdo it. So great stuff. Learn how to say no to customers, to employees, trade partners, email. Say no to inbox zero. It's my personal, I'm not a fan of inbox zero. So don't feel like you have to do all of this stuff. Okay, let's talk about strategies for the second group of three. These are the people who have low frustration tolerance. Low frustration tolerance. First is the crisis maker. First of all, identify other self-motivators besides stress. You're going to have to figure out what else motivates you other than stress and crisis. Work on changing your thinking style from extremist and general to moderate and specific, right? Well, just change the way you think. This is hard. All of these are probably hard, but I think we've established that the results of procrastinating are hard. And then avoid overdramatic, polarized language, emotional, overdramatic, always, never, end of the world type language. And I think one that's probably important for all of these is accountability, to have somebody else who's holding you accountable. But definitely the crisis maker needs someone holding them accountable. The dreamer, if you're a dreamer, then you need to train yourself to differentiate between dreams and goals. A dream is not a goal. You need to plan every major project that you have in writing. Have a timeline, specify each step that you need to take, really analyze every thought, every plan you have before you share it with your team. I've talked to visionaries who they have somebody else who's a filter for their visions. They have this great idea, they're going to go bounce it off somebody in their mastermind group or a peer or a mentor before they lay it on their team, so they don't fatigue. Their team doesn't struggle from dream fatigue. I just made that word up. Dream fatigue is a big problem. And then change your some days and soons to specific times. So instead of having these generalities, dreams, have a plan, have deadlines, and be very specific about things. And then for those of us who are Defier procrastinators, learn to view what someone else wants or expects as a request, not a demand. It's a request, not something you have to do. You have a choice. I think this is where we tend to puff up our chest and defies because we feel like some choices are being taken away from us, but we have choices. Strive to act or respond rather than react. emotionally. Do something specific that will satisfy you because it's done your way. You may want to come up with a hobby that you are completely in control of. You can do it however you want, as meaningful or as meaningless as you want, but it's a creative outlet for you. So you get to do exactly what you want the way you want. That could be helpful. And then if you haven't done something, then don't be passive aggressive about it. Just own up to it. If you've defied someone, if you're not going to do it, tell them no. I'm not going to do that in the beginning, instead of saying, yeah, I'll do that, and then screw you afterward, and then avoiding them. Just either tell them no up front, and if you didn't do it, own up to it and say, hey, I haven't done this yet. I'm not going to do it, or I haven't done it yet, and here's what I'm going to do moving forward. So those are the specific strategies for the different procrastinators. You may want to listen to this a few other times, take some notes, do something with this. Create some habits, get some accountability, do something with this. And I can tell you one of the fastest ways to boost your mindset and defeat procrastination in your life is really to get into a community of other people who are working on the same stuff as you every day, dealing with the same challenges of procrastination. If you're a business owner, you have very specific challenges that only other business owners understand. And that's what we have here at Construction Leading Edge. We have this incredible program where we work with you to systematize your construction business like we've done with lots of our other clients. We'll begin to work with you on your mindset along the way, giving you the tools to defeat procrastination. And one of the more surprising side effects about that is that for a lot of our clients, not only is their business and their bank account and their day-to-day schedule radically different, but they are radically different as a person. They have more confidence, they have more peace, their anxiety is lower, they're a better leader, they're more present at home. They begin to understand the true value of what they deliver. They have no problem charging a premium price for their work or being selective about who they work with. So if that's what you want, then we want to invite you to book a call to speak to us. Go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply, APPLY, then book an appointment to speak to us. We'll get on the phone for about 45 minutes. Then you can tell us everything that's working in your business, everything that's not working in your business, and we'll put our heads together and come up with a step-by-step game plan to get you exactly where you want to go. We'll talk about the real root causes of your biggest and most painful problems and our crucial systems that we would recommend that will help solve those root causes, but also what needs to change in your mindset to get where you want to go. And if you want our help to do that, we can talk about that too. If not, that's fine too. No big deal. Either way, our goal for that call is to give you massive value. So go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply. Book that appointment to speak to us. It's absolutely free, and it'll be the best 45 minutes you've ever spent working on your business. I can promise you that. So some of you are probably thinking, I should probably do that. And I can tell you, I think we've made it clear what procrastination is going to sound like and the dangers of procrastinating. So, Leyah, great stuff. Anything else that we need to cover on this topic of procrastination? Anything else you want to leave our audience with?
Yeah, just another thought that a coach I worked with in the past had shared with me, and I've tried to internalize this. And she told me, you're one decision away from changing your life. And that sounds really dramatic, but it's true. We get to make decisions every single day. And what if you did book this call? How drastically different would your life be? What if you did make that phone call that you needed to someone that you've been putting off? What if you did take the leap and start your own business that you've been wanting to? It's just one decision. One decision. It doesn't mean that you have to quit your job and go start a business, but what's one thing you can do right now, today, that's going to change your life? And that's, I think, something to just keep in mind. We're always one decision away from changing our life.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff. And then every client of ours who's had fantastic results, people we've interviewed, people who have shared their customer success stories on our website. It all started with that call. It all started with that decision to do that. So really the decision is not, you don't need to figure out, how am I going to do this? Do I have time? What if? The real question is it worth 45 minutes to schedule a call? That's really the question here. So we'll leave you with that. Leyah, thanks so much. I really feel like this is going to help some people shine a light into what's going on. I think they have some good practical strategies.
Yes.
And thanks for being on here. Thanks for all the great work you're doing, the results that you are instrumental in our clients achieving in our program. And we look forward to having you on here again sometime soon.
Yes, thank you. I'm even taking some of these tips away with me. Thank you, Todd.